Have you ever wondered how a deer is processed and what it has to go through to get to your dinner plate? I think it is very important to know what a deer has to go through to get processed at the butcher shop. I will be explaining the process that it takes for a deer to get from the field to your dinner table. I, in the fall time, have a deer butchering business, and that is how I make most of my money, so that I know quite a bit about this subject. The main points of this will be from field dressing a deer to skinning a deer to cutting it into the primal cuts. First, how do you field dress a deer? It's very important to have the right equipment. According to the beginner's guide to butchering deer, you need to have a very sharp knife with a short blade, because it's very important that you have control of your knife whenever you are field dressing a deer. It's also probably important to have latex gloves, because this process will be very messy. The process of field dressing a deer, you start at the tail and you cut all the way to the breastplate. You make sure the knife is facing out so you don't poke any of the organs. Then you cut at the tail and start pulling all of the organs out of the animal, using your knife to cut them off the back spine of the animal. Then once you get to the windpipe, you cut at the windpipe and pull the rest of the guts out. And now that you have the animal field dressed, now it gets onto the part of skinning. According to Deer Processing 101 by Bone Collector, there are 5 steps to skinning an animal. First, you need to hang the animal up from its hind legs. Then you need to cut at the joints of every leg all the way down to your first main cut. Then you start pulling the skin away from the muscle, cutting in the connective tissue. Once you get all the way around, you can actually pull most of the skin off on the back just by your hand. You don't even need a knife. Once you get to the bottom, towards the head of the animal, you need to stick your knife in the joint that's holding the head on, and then cut all the way around and pull the head off. Once you have your skin removed from your animal, it is very important to wash off the animal just in case there's any excess hair or dirt left on the meat. Now that your animal has been skinned, it needs to hang in the cooler for 1 to 8 days. This is a process called dry curing, and this will make the meat more tender. Now we'll talk about how to cut the meat into the primal cuts. This is based off of how the Bearded Butcher's YouTube video, How to Butcher a Deer. As is important earlier in the process, it's very important to have a sharp knife, but this time you need a knife blade that is about 6 inches long to make longer strokes and cuts. First, you will divide the animal into the main cuts. So you take off all the legs and all the main muscle groups. First, you cut out the tenderloins, which are on the inside of the carcass of the animal. You can just use your knife and run up against all of the ribs, and this will then remove your tenderloin. Then you cut off the back legs as you cut down the H-bone until you get to the hip joint. You can pop the leg out of socket and then continue with your knife all the way through. Then you remove the front shoulder. And with the front shoulder, it's just a shoulder blade, so you don't have to cut any joints. You just pull it away from the carcass, from the main body, and use your knife and follow all the way through. And then the final step to remove is your back strap. And you cut right along the main ribs on the outside and cut all the way to the spinal cord, and then pull and keep removing until the back strap are free. And then what is left on the carcass from that point on turns into grind. Now that you have your animal cut into the subprimal cuts, now you need to cut it into primals. First, you start on the hind legs. There is 4 main muscle groups in the hind legs. The first muscle group is called the round tip, which is actually the front muscle above the kneecap. And then after that is the 3 others: the top round, the eye round, and the bottom around. All of these you'll have to cut off the main femur bone itself. And if you just follow the main seams on the muscle groups, they'll come off quite easily. Then once you get to the front shoulder, in Oklahoma, since our deer are so small, unlike there in Ohio, those just turn mainly into grind because there's not enough meat to make a roast. Then once you get to your back strap, you remove the top layer of fat that is left over, and then you also have to remove what is called a thin layer called silver skin, because that gets tough whenever you try and cook it. Then you can cut your back straps into little medallions about 1.25 inches wide, or butterfly your steaks, where you cut 3/4 of the way through and then cut all the way through and unfold them. That's why they call it a butterfly steak. Then the final thing you do is clean up the tenderloin. You cut off the excess kidney fat that is left on top of them from them sitting next to the kidney. And then any scraps that you have left over turns into grind, and you can turn grind into things like summer sausage, which many people like. And at this point, you just package the rest of your meat and put it into the freezer. So as stated earlier, the main points of this were how to field dress, how to skin your animal, and also how to cut it into your primal cuts. In conclusion, now that you know how to cut up your own deer, you know what your animal has to go through once it goes to the butcher shop, and I think that's good for everybody to understand. Now video yourself. Okay, now video everybody else.